𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 and welcome to 𝓥𝓲𝓫 classes for 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪. In this video, I'll explain the chapter 3rd of class 11th political science, and the chapter that we have got for this video is election and representation. So election and representation. Now basically in this chapter we will study about elections and how we represent ourselves through elections. Now you do know that what elections are, but after studying this chapter you would get the answers of some questions such as what are the different systems of elections, the characteristics of the election system adopted by our country, the importance of free and fair elections, and the controversies around electoral reforms. So these will be some set of arenas that we'll study in this chapter. Now what you have to know is that what is true for a game is also true for elections, because if you change the rules, if you don't have an umpire, like if you take any game, chess or maybe cricket or it could be basketball, now you do know that if the rules are changed and if there is no referee or umpire, then the outcome would be very different. Maybe a different group would win that game. The same happens, the same applies to an election as well. Now what happens that if you change the rules, the do's and don'ts of elections, the outcome, the result might be very different. So that is why there are different systems of elections as well. And to have an impartial election in our country, there are some provisions in the constitution itself. So that is why we are studying this chapter, because in this book we were going to cover about everything that is in our constitution. So basically there are provisions about elections in our constitution as well, and that is why we are studying this chapter. So without any further ado, let's get started with the first topic, that is elections and democracy. So elections and democracy. Now, what is the relation between elections and democracy? This can be shown by asking two questions. Can an election be without democracy? Secondly, can a democracy without being an election? Now you do know that the spirit of democracy lies in an election. When we think about democracy, when we talk about democratic spirit in India, your mind invariably turns to the last election held in our country. So that is why elections are very important in a democratic country to choose our representatives. As you have already studied in 9th and 10th classes, that a basic feature of democracy is to have a free and fair elections. Then apart from that, we often distinguish between direct and indirect democracy. Now in direct democracy, what happens is that people themselves come up to make laws to run the government in their country. This could be seen in the ancient cities of Greece and still can be seen in the local government of India. Now if you go to Gram Panchayats or Gram Sabhas, you would see that people come up by themselves and are making laws, policies for their villages. So that is called as direct democracy, where there is no need of representatives. Now this surely cannot be run in any big country or in any big area where there is a large population. Now if you take the example of India, there is such a big population that we can't keep just crores of people in a parliament, and that is why we need representatives. Now another reason is also here that even if all the people come together, even if the population is controlled by the government, then the people, do they really have the skills to make the laws or to run the government in our country? So that is why the number of population, the scale of population, and then the skills of the population matter the most for making the government, and that is why we need representatives through elections. So it becomes very important in an indirect democracy that the system of choosing the representatives is fair or not. So that is the main thing in a democracy, and thus we can say that a democracy cannot exist without elections, because without elections we can't choose the representatives, and thus a democracy can't be formed. Now another question is that can an election be without democracy? Of course it could be. Like we have seen the example of China, of the ancient time of Mexico, and as well as Zimbabwe in 9th class, that about how the election turned up there. And in fact there are many non-democratic countries, non-democratic rulers who are keen to show themselves as democratic by holding elections. But the point is that they are not free and fair, and thus can't be called democratic. So that is why an election can always be without democracy as well, but the democracy can never be without elections. Like for example, if you take the example of China, there also elections are held, but that is one party rule. That is not a democratic way. But in any democratic country like India or the US, you will see that elections are held properly. So we can say that a democracy can never be without elections, and elections can always be without democracy as well. So that would be the relation or the equation between democracy and elections. Now here comes the next topic, that is election system in India. Now election system in India. Now you might have been wondering that there have been many references to the system of elections, that there could be different methods of election, the system of election in India. But isn't that simple, that we have just a system of election where people have to go, have to cast their votes, and those the votes would be counted and the leader will be elected. But it's not as simple as it appears, because this question about the system of elections is not simple. Well, we have been in an environment where we just see the election system of our country, and thus we think that it is the only system of elections. But what's the point is that there can be different types of elections. There can be different do's and don'ts of elections and different system of election. Now the system of election could be in favor of majority, or it could be in favor of minority. It could be in the favor of bigger parties or promoting the smaller political parties. So the system of election matters the most. And if we talk about the Indian system of election, then we will be talking about two systems of elections in this chapter. Now the first one here is first past the post system. So first past the post system. Now this system is followed in India, and in every election except some, this system is held in our country. Now even the name suggests what this is about. We will see through an example. Now in the elections of 1984, the Indian National Congress got 80% of the seats. It got 415 seats out of 543 total seats of Lok Sabha, that is in Parliament. But if we talk about the votes, it got only 48% of the votes. So you see that it got 48% of the votes while it got 80% of the seats. And if we look at the same election, the results of BJP, there it had got 7.4% of the votes by the people, while it got only 2 or 1 seat, that is even less than 1% of the seat. So that shows that even though it had not got the majority, because majority would be more than 50%, the Indian National Congress still formed the government, because we follow the system called first past the post system, where you don't need to have a majority, you just need to pass the post firstly, then other candidates, and thus you would form the government. So that happened the same. Now here what matters that you don't have to, the candidate need not have to majority. What he needs is that, what the candidate needs is that more than other candidate has got. So suppose if that person had got only 25% of the votes by the people, still he would be elected, because it had got more than, that person had got more than votes than other candidates. So that shows that even if a candidate is not forming any kind of majority, but still it is more than the other candidates, then it would be that that candidate has formed the government or has been elected. So that is called plurality system, or first past the post system, that has been adopted in our country. Now what happens that here you don't have majority, you still get the seats, and thus it is called plurality system as well, and first past the post system, just as the name suggests. And there are many countries such as India, UK that have adopted this system of elections. Now there can be many critics coming up that saying that you don't have that much votes, but still you are having that much seats, because without if you look at the total seats like that has been elected, suppose in a country if there are 4 constituencies, but that single candidate got more than votes than the other candidates, and even if a small proportion of the votes has been given to that, so that shows that the other votes like the 7.4% given to BJP were wasted, and thus the many votes of the people have been wasted. Now there could be another system of election as well, and that is known as proportional representation. So proportional representation or the PR system. Now in this system, as the name suggests, you would get the representation in proportion. There would be equal proportion of seats and votes. So if you get 50% of the votes, then the candidate would get only 50% of the seats. It would not be that the candidate would form the government and would get 100% of seats or 90% of seats. It would be that as much as you get the votes, you would get the seats in the parliament. Now this system can be in 2 variations as well. First variation could be in countries such as Israel or the Netherlands. Now there the first variation of PR system is followed, where the whole country is treated as a single constituency. Now there will be different parties, like if you take the example of Israel. In Israel, the parliament is known as Knesset, and you should remember that this parliament is known as Knesset. And what happens that if any candidate gets more than 3.25% of the votes, then that person is eligible, that candidate is eligible to have a seat in parliament. So that there would be multi-member kind of government. As much the party gets a seat, it would have to get that much votes as well. So that would be proportional representation. Now there can be a second variation of PR system as well, that is followed in countries such as Portugal and Argentina. Now there are many constituencies, not just one constituencies, but there are many constituencies, and there are multi-member constituencies as well. What does multi-member represent? So that means that if a country is divided into 4 constituencies, then in each one of them there would be more than one member. There can be more than one member of legislative assemblies. There can be more than one seat. It could be 10 seats, it could be 5 seats, depending upon the candidates, depending upon this system of election there. So there could be 2 variations of the PR system. Now in the first variation, what happens that each candidate, each party fills the list of, it gives a preference list. Then after that, what happens that if it has won this much 20% of the votes, then according to that party would get 20% of the seats. So from that preference list, it would choose its nominees. So that is how the PR system works. Now why are we talking about it? Is it followed in India as well, like just as I said, that FPTP system, the first past to post system, is adopted in our country. So why are we talking about the PR system? Actually, yes, it is. PR system is also followed in our country only in some elections that are of the president, the vice president, and Vidhan Parishad, that is the legislative council of the states. So here you have a very complicated system, because in India, you know that even for Rajya Sabha we have this kind of PR system. India has adopted a 3rd variation of the PR system with a single transferable votes. We can see it through an example of elections to the Rajya Sabha. Now, as you know that Rajya Sabha is different from Lok Sabha, as it never dissolves. Every year what happens that the cycle of election goes of 1/3. That 1/3 of members are always elected, and hence the cycle goes on without dissolving the Rajya Sabha. So what happens that if you take the example of Rajasthan, there are 4 vacancies in Rajasthan, so there are 4 seats in Rajasthan. Now the situation is like that any candidate would have to get the majority, then only it can form the government. That means it would get the seats there. What happens that there are 200 MLAs electing. You do know that for Rajya Sabha we don't directly elect those people, but they are the MLAs, that is member of legislative assemblies, who elect those Rajya Sabha members. So there are 4 vacancies in Rajasthan and 200 MLAs have to choose candidates for these 4 seats. Now what would happen that total votes casted, that is 200 votes casted upon the total number of seats plus 1. So there are 4 number of seats, that is 4 vacancies are there, and plus 1, you would add 1, it would get to 5. So 200 divided by 5 would be 40. Now you have to add 1 more in that and it would get to 41. So if a candidate secures 41 or more than that, then only that person can get that seat and it would form the government there with a majority. So that would be a proportional representation with a third variation, where what happened that person has got the majority. Now it could also be the case that no candidate has got the majority there. So what would happen then? The situation there would be solved with a single transferable votes. So suppose if there are 5 candidates, A, B, C, D and E, and every person, you know what, that MLAs have to list their preferences as any candidate as first preference, any candidate as second preference, another candidate as third preference, so that if there is only 1 seat and you have to choose among all these 5 between A to E, what would happen that the person who has been chosen as the first preference would get the seat. So every MLA would have to list down his first, second, third, fourth preferences. Then what would happen then? Suppose all of them, A, B, C, D and E, have got the first preferences not up to the majority. Suppose in the case of Rajasthan, they had not get the 41 seats, 41 votes by the MLAs. Then what would happen that if E has got the least number of first preference votes, then the voters who have voted him, their second preference would be seen. And those second preferences, suppose all the voters, the E got only 4 votes as first preference. Now and those second preference, like those voters who voted for E as first preference, have chosen A as second preference. Now this A would have all the second preference votes, those 4 votes added up to his votes, so that what would happen if 4 are added and it gets more than 41 or 41 in the case of Rajasthan, then A would get the seat. So this is kind of single transferable vote, where the votes are transferred according to the second preferences of the voters who have chosen E as a first preference. Now whoever has got the second preference, like if there are 2 were for A and 2 were for B, so they would be divided like that, and if still it is not forming a majority, then this cycle would continue on, and this would be the third variation of PR system with a single transferable vote in our country for the election of Rajya Sabha members. So this is kind of the PR system. Now another thing that come up here is comparison of FPTP and PR system of election. So comparison of FPTP and the PR system of elections. So it is very important to compare these as well, because without comparison we can't tell anything. So let's start their comparison. Now in FPTP system you have many constituencies, many small geographical areas called as constituencies or districts. But in PR system there could be no constituency, and even if they are big demarcated areas known as constituencies. Now in FPTP system the voter chooses a candidate, but in the PR system the voter chooses a party, not a candidate. Thirdly, what happens in FPTP system, even if you don't have majority, still you can get elected. In PR system, until and unless you are forming a majority, you won't form any government. Fourth would be that a candidate gets more seats compared to his votes. In the PR system, a person gets as much as seats as the votes that person has got. Then we can see the examples as well. For FPTP system, you have the example of India, the UK. For the PR system, you have the examples of the Netherlands or Portugal. So there are the different comparison in different grounds for the FPTP system of elections and the PR system of elections. Now here the next question that comes up is, why did India adopt the FPTP system? So why exactly India adopt the FPTP system? Now, the simple reason that might come into your mind is that the simplicity. We have seen that just for the Rajya Sabha elections, you had so much complexity. So, if you had all the elections in that same way of manner, then what would happen? It would lead to a lot of complexity. Now, to break into simple words, the main reason for the favorability of the FPTP system in our country is its simplicity. Even if a person is not specified, is not specialized in elections and politics, still that person can understand the way of elections is held in our country. You see that in elections there are very backward class people who don't even have education, so still they are understanding the system of election in our country because the FPTP system is providing simplicity to them. It is very easy for them to understand the system of election in our country. Secondly, what happens that through FPTP system, you would see that even the people from the background areas, from the remote areas are coming up to vote, to cast their votes. Because if the PR system was in India, then what would happen is that every community would start forming their own nationwide parties. What would happen that suppose in our country there are only three communities are there, A, B and C. Then what would happen that people from A community would start their nationwide parties, people from B community would start their nationwide party, and people from C community as well. Then what would happen that people from A community would only vote their party, people from B community would also cast their vote only to the B party. So it would lead to kind of polarization in our country as well. That could lead to social conflicts. So that's why FPTP system in India has proven to be more beneficial. Then there is another reason that in many of the countries the FPTP system leads to two-party dominance in the country. What happens that only two parties are nationwide parties, like national parties, who are competing for the power. But that's not the case in India. Till 1990s, what happened that in India only one party was dominant in India, that was the Indian National Congress. What happened that only it had the major dominance in the electoral politics, but it was only after that nowadays we are seeing the major change in our electoral politics, that is of coalition government. What has happened that since then in India we have seen many parties have formed alliance with each other, because no party is getting the majority of the votes, no party is getting that much votes as they need to have to form the government. So that is why they are forming the alliances so that they can form the government in our country. Like you might know different parties like the Indian National Congress, the Bharatiya Janata Party, but you know what, that they're not single parties. They have formed alliances with many other parties as well. Like we have the UPA, the NDA. These are very different kind of coalition parties that have been formed. So since then in India we have seen the result of FPTP system as of a coalition government being formed in India. Now this is the way, like you know that because of its simplicity, because of the extra, you know that this FPTP system also provides a kind of seats for as an extra bonus to all those executive. Because here what happens that we have adopted in India parliamentary system of government. We will study about this in next chapters of this book, but in this system executive should have more power, and that's what's provided by the FPTP system as an extra bonus. So that was predicted by the constitution makers as well, and that is why, so that there would be more executive in the parliament, this system has been chosen in our country. Now the next topic that comes up here is reservation of constituencies. Now, reservation of constituencies. So, reservation of constituencies. Now, as you know that in the FPTP system that has been adopted in India, what happens is that the person who gets the highest vote is elected. So, it leads to social disadvantages as well, and especially a country like India, which had a very long history of caste discrimination. So, there might be many people of backward classes, socially backward classes, that have been marginalized and are not coming into power, and that is why in Indian context, in Indian election system, we have reserved constituencies. Now, first of all, there is a difference between reserved constituencies and the separate electorates. Now, you know what, that separate electorates that were demanded during the British government in India by different by Muslims, by different religion, and by different caste as well. Now, in separate electorate, what happens that in a particular constituency, a person who's standing for elections has to be from a particular community, and the voters have to be from the same community, but that does not apply for a reserved constituency. In a reserved constituency, the person might be from a socially backward class, that the candidate might be from a socially backward class, but the voter need not be a very socially backward class or from that particular community. That voter can be from any community. So that would be the major difference between separate electorates and reserved constituencies. Now, in India, what happened that when the first time reserved constituencies were introduced in India, it was for 10 years. Then it was extended till 2020. Now, as of now, what has happened in India, we have reserved constituencies for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. 84 seats for the scheduled castes and 47 seats for the scheduled tribes have been reserved in the Lok Sabha, in the parliament, for these socially backward classes. Now, there is a major question that who gets to decide that here this constituency should be reserved. So that is done by the Delimitation Commission of India, that has been appointed by the President of India and works with addition of the Election Commission, like forming a kind of alliance with the Election Commission. Together with it works. Now, the major work of the Delimitation Commission is to form the boundaries, is to draw the boundaries of the constituencies in our country. Now, after drawing up the boundaries, what it does is that see the population composition of each and every constituency. Now, if in any constituency the population of scheduled tribes are more, the composition of their population is more, then that particular constituency would be reserved as a constituency for the tribal people, for the scheduled tribes. Now, the same goes for the SCs as well, but in the reservation of SCs, there are two things that need to be noted. First is that the population composition. What is the population composition there? So that particular constituency can be reserved for the SCs. Secondly is that it has to be distributed overall evenly throughout the country, because STs we majorly have in some particular areas, but SCs we have in many different parts of the country. So that is why when Delimitation Commission tries to draw the boundary, it tries to do the reserved constituencies for the SCs in such a manner that it would be evenly distributed in our country. Now, you know what, the reservation of these constituencies has always been very controversial since it was introduced. Then after, we also have another thing, that there are many other groups, many other social disadvantaged groups who are demanding for the reserved constituencies, because the Constitution of India is not providing reservation for every socially backward classes. Like recently, there have been many demands for the reservation of women's seats in the parliament at least 1/3, because in local governments such as in municipalities, in gram panchayats, we have 1/3 of the seats reserved for the women, because till now still in the parliament there has been very least composition of women. So that is why there have been many demands for the reservation of women in the parliament. Moving on, we have the next topic, that is free and fair elections. So free and fair elections. Now the real test, the exact test of an election would be how impartial it is. Is it free and fair election? Because the real test is in that field, that whether the election is free or not, whether it is fair or not. And to provide this in our country, to prevent unfair and unfree, like unjust elections in our country, to ensure this kind of thing in India, we have two pillars. Let's talk about them, how they secure free and fair elections in our country one by one. Now the first one here is universal franchisee and the right to contest. So universal franchisee and the right to contest. Now when we talk about elections, the first thing is that who's allowed to vote. Are we allowed to vote? Secondly, who's allowed to contest, who can become a candidate. Now you do know that in our country universal adult franchisee is, that is every adult citizen has the right to vote. Now till 1989 the adult citizen age was of 21, but after 1989 it was reduced to 18, and now every citizen of India above the age of 18 has the right to vote. That person can definitely have the voters card, voters ID, and then go to cast their votes. Then secondly, we have another thing is that in our country, you know that when India was formed, independent India was formed, and the constitution makers were making the constitution of India, it had been an undebated matter that the right to vote, universal adult franchisee, would be given to every citizen, because you know that there have been many countries in the world map that have a long struggle, that had a very long struggle just to get the right to vote. Recently in 2015 only, the women in Saudi Arabia got the right to vote, and there have been many instances in our world where different countries people had to struggle for the right to vote. But in India, irrespective of religion, race, caste or anything, the right to vote had been given to every person. Now when this right was given to every person, there were many people who thought, and still are many people who think, that giving the right to vote to every person without their educational qualifications is unjust. But the constitution makers had seen that the worth of the citizens, that they had the ability to choose a right for themselves. Then it is also consistent with the fundamental rights that talk about the non-discrimination and equality of all people, like we have the rule of law and equality before law as well. So that is consistent with that kind of spirit. Second question is that who has the right to contest, who can be a candidate in the elections. Well, every person has the right to be a candidate for elections. Every person has the right to vote, right to contest in any election, but there are certain kind of requirements as well. Like for the age requirement in Lok Sabha elections, the minimum age requirement is of 25, and there are very certain restrictions as well on some people. Like if a person has a criminal record, has a legal imprisonment for 2 years or more than that, that person cannot be a candidate. So that has to be seen that the right to contest is with every person, whether to become an independent candidate or to join a party, but it's just that the legal things have to be seen. Otherwise, there has been no limitation, no restriction on gender, on wealth, on equal or like educational qualifications. There have been no restrictions on these fields. So this is how India is ensuring free and fair elections through giving the adult franchisee like the right to vote and the right to contest as well. Now the second pillar of ensuring the free and fair elections in our country is of that Independent Election Commission. Now Independent Election Commission, Now you know what, that the Article 324 of our Indian Constitution, the clause 1 of Article 324 reads, the superintendent's direction and control of the preparation of electoral rolls for and of the elections for the parliament and the legislature of every state, and of elections of the offices of the president and the vice president under this constitution shall be vested to a commission referred as election commission in this constitution. Now this article gives the right of the superintendents the control and the conduct of all electoral rolls, that is of all elections under this constitution, under a commission, and that commission is known as election commission. That becomes very important because that power has been given to them by the Constitution of India. So basically in India we have an election commission where there are election commissioners as the members of that commission, and they have very many functions of the elections, of conducting elections in our country. Now till 1989 this body of election commission used to be a single member body, but it was only some years earlier that elections were to be held, and some more members were elected, were appointed for this election commission. Now it became a multi-member commission. Then again what happened that some years later it again became a single member party, and it was only in 1993 that it again became a multi-member commission, and since then it has been a multi-member commission. Now the Election Commission of India is appointed by the President of India under the advice of the Council of Ministers, and hence many people like the critics have said that this method of appointing the election commissioners is not good, because we see that there could be that president is appointing only for the ruling party, so that could lead to those kind of things. So there have been many demands for changing the method of appointing the Election Commission of India. Now there is another thing, that the Chief Election Commissioner, you know that the power, the sharing of power between the Chief Election Commissioners and the Election Commissioners, because earlier it used to be a single member party, a single member commission, then some members came up. So what would be the sharing of power? Now this was held by the Supreme Court. Now after this we have the Chief Election Commissioner who presides over the Election Commission, but if we talk about the power, all the members of the Election Commission have the same power. It's not like the Chief Election Commissioner, that is the CEC, has more powers than the ECs, that is Election Commissioners. Then if we talk about the retirement, then they have two conditions: either complete the term of 6 years or complete the age of 65. Whichever comes first, the retirement of that particular chief election commissioner or election commissioner would be decided. And if there is any breach of law, like that election commissioner or chief election commissioner has outlawed something or has something done against law, then it would be under the advice of majority of the members of both the houses of parliament. Then they would be suspended, so that ruling party won't preside over them. So there will be majority of both the houses of the parliament. So that would be the appointment and the retirement of the election commissioner members. Now apart from that, if we talk about the functions of the Election Commission, then there are a lot of functions of the Election Commission. First is that to review and recheck the up-to-date voters list, because voters list is the list for the voters of a particular constituency. Now it needs to recheck and check about the adders, whether there is non-existence of some particular voter, or if there is existence of some fake voter. That has to be checked upon by the Election Commission. Secondly, all the election schedule is announced by the Election Commission of India. That means that filing of nominations, withdrawal of the nominations, the date for the votes, the date for the counting of votes, the date for the result of the votes, the date of scrutiny, all are decided by the Election Commission of India. Third is that the election commission is the body who is the supervising all the elections held by it in our country. So in every election there would be agents of the election commission to supervise that there is not any kind of malpractices in that particular election. Then we also have for that all the symbols and recognition to political parties are given by the election commission. It is only the election commission of India that gives the symbols and recognition to the political parties. Then also to check whether the political parties are following the laws or not, whether they are in the conduct of elections or not, they are the ones to check. Then the code of conduct for the elections is also introduced, is also released by the Election Commission of India. So they are the ones who release a list of do's and don'ts of the elections. Then there is this thing that in India we see that that the results are announced. That is also announced by the Election Commission of India. So what happens that when elections have to be held, like the date of elections are coming near, 5 years are to be ended so soon, then what happens that all the power of administration as far as it is concerned with elections goes up to the Election Commission. All the administrative members, all the administrative people are assigned the work to work for the election commission. So at that time all the administrators have the work for the elections, and the election commission has the power to transfer them or to stop their transfers if they are not acting in a partisan manner, in an impartial manner for the elections. So that has to be done by the election commission, and at that time even the ruling party can't disobey the election commission. At that time, if the election commission sees that this person or this candidate, this political party is not obeying with the law, then it can take their vote, take their nomination. That means that they are not allowed to vote to contest in the elections. It can also order for the repoll or postpone or cancel any elections in the country if it has seen that the elections were not free and fair. So to ensure that the elections were held freely and fairly, the election commission has the most enormous power in our country. That means that that election commission of India is known to be one of the most independent election commissions in the world, which has been proved in our country. Over the last 65 years, 16 Lok Sabha elections have been held, and a lot of state legislative assemblies elections have also been held. We have also seen that there have been many problems in front of the election commission, like conducting a free and fair election in military affected areas such as Jammu and Kashmir, that is a union territory. Then some states like Assam and kind of Punjab, these states are military affected states. So there it becomes kind of hard to hold elections in a very upright manner. Then also to hold elections in 1991 when the ex-Prime Minister of India Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated. So it was really hard to hold elections in a free and fair manner. Then in 2002 in Gujarat, when the Gujarat Assembly had been dissolved, then what happened? Elections had to be elections had to be held. But what happened? There were many riots going on. There were many protesters that came up. So it was really hard to balance the upright, free and fair elections there. So that is the burden of the election commission that they have to do. They have the major, because that election commission does not have that much of the force. They don't have that much members, but it is the administration. At the time of election, all the government powers comes to the election commission. That is, they have all the power during that time of administration of all administrative people, officers. They have been assigned to the election commission as they want to, they can use. So that would be Independent Election Commission of India. Now moving on, we have the next topic, that is electoral reform. So electoral reform. Now till now we have seen that yes, elections are held in this manner, but still people have seen there is a need to change some kind of system, some kind of policies in elections. There have been as the time changes, these laws also need to be changed, and there are many popular kind of argument that have been given by the people, by some big scholars, by some political parties, even by some Chief Justice of India, some ex-Chief Justice of India. So many people have given their statement about electoral reforms in our country. So let's talk about them. Some of them, or of course we can't just talk every one of them. Now, first reform that has been demanded is of changing the system of election from FPTP system to PR system, so that every candidate would get the seats as much as that person has got the votes. Secondly, there should be reservation for women at least 1/3 of the seats in the parliament, because still they don't have that much representation in the parliament. Thirdly, there should be stricter policies. There should be very strict policies, laws for the money uses in any election campaign, in any election kind of expenses for elections. There should be kind of government fund that should be provided to every candidate. Fourth is that any person who has a criminal background, even though it was imprisonment or not, it is still pending or not, doesn't matter, should not be allowed to contest in elections. So anyone from criminal background is not allowed to vote, is not allowed to contest. So there have been many demands for there is also this demand that there should be regulating policies, government policies to see the political parties. Now you know what, these are some of the electoral reforms demanded by these people. What we have to see is that apart from these legal reforms, there is two things that we can do. First is that people should be engaged more in political activities, so that they could have more knowledge and they can see that what is good or not for them. Secondly, if people aren't engaging that much, then it should be the political parties, the political institutions, the voluntary groups that should come up, like the NGOs, the political voluntary groups. These should come up and should work for the political activities, for the awareness among the people about political things. So that should be done in our country for electoral reforms. Now lastly, we have conclusion. What is the conclusion of this chapter? Till now we have read. Now we have seen that elections are really very important for any country, not just in India. And in India, even though there are shortcomings, it's still good, because there are many factors leading us to think that Indian elections are really free and fair. First of all, first is that during the last years, what has happened that there has been more engagement of the people in political activities. We have seen that more candidates are coming up in our country and more voters are coming up as well. You know that during the surveys these are done, and we have seen that there have been more engagements. Secondly, more representatives from socially backward classes are also coming. Like recently, the President of India, she is from a tribal background. So that shows that there have been more people from SCs and STs in the parliament, even though women haven't been that much, but still we are talking about the socially backward classes. Third is that over the years, you know what, that is that even though there have been there may be some small cases of malpractices, like that of rigging, some kind of malpractices in elections, but still that does not affect the overall outcome. We have seen that there is not that much impact of the malpractices over the outcomes of the election results. And the most important thing is that whatever the result is, whether the ruling party has won or the opposition party has won, the people are really very happy to take that result, to accept that result. Even if the ruling party has won or the opposition party or any party has won or lost in that elections, the results are always accepted by the Indian people. So that shows that people have a great acceptance towards the result of the election, because they have the trust in the election commission in the elections held in our country. So that shows that concludes the point even though there are shortcomings in the Indian election system, still FPTP system has been proven more beneficiary for our country, and still we are coping up, counter-attacking ourselves from these shortcomings. So that's all we have covered in this chapter. Now in this chapter you have got the answers of all those questions that we started at the beginning of the chapter. We have seen different methods of elections, what elections are actually, the characteristics of the methods of Indian system like FPTP and PR in Rajya Sabha. Then we also have seen free and fair elections, how they are upheld in our country. Then we have seen also about electoral reforms. So that's all we have covered in this chapter. I have covered all the topics and subtopics. For the next chapters will be covered in further upcoming videos. So stay tuned for the upcoming videos. Thank you very much.